one thing is I've always imagined what the world could be. Sometimes the gap between what I know is possible and what we have breaks my heart. When things fall apart, I want people to know how to turn toward each other rather than on each other. How do we learn to love each other, not turn on each other? And love for me has been is the path, especially loving people who are different from us.
In today's episode of The Inspired House, we're joined by author, restorative justice advocate, and director emeritus of the Gandhi Institute, Kit Miller. We talk identity, leadership, and what it means to build systems that help mitigate conflict so people feel safe at work. Hey family, welcome to The Inspired House. It's crazy to think that we are now back in 2026, new year, same focus. We're here to focus on this idea of how we can be better together. And family, I got somebody really special for y'all. Okay, so now I know some of y'all have messaged me and talked to me about Desmond. I'm kind of wrestling with this person on my job, or there just seems to be maybe like a values mismatch at work, and I'm just really getting burnt out. How do I navigate, check out this word, conflict? And family, when I tell you I have found one of the best in terms of thought leadership, but not just thought leadership, because a lot of people, they can do the thought leadership, they can write words, but who's actually in the trenches doing this work. I am so excited to introduce to some, right, and present to others my colleague, my friend, Kit Miller. Kit, how are you doing?
I'm so glad to be here and listen to you. It's like good medicine. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Oh, you already know. When I first reached out and I kind of asked you during, I think, one of our retreats and bounced it to you, I was really kind of nervous because I was like, man, like, Kit be busy, like Kit out here doing this work, and this Kit got time. And the testament to who you are is just the graciousness you had. And you the best way I can say it is you almost sounded like flattered. And I was like, what? Like, come on, Kit, like you're a kid. And so now here I am, right? We were talking about folk who we like gush over and fangirl over, and here I am gushing and fangirling over you. So let me get it together as a podcast host, right? Real professional. But you do so much. You operate as the director emeritus for the Gandhi House. You've written books on what it looks like to operate within a culture of nonviolence and healing in the workplace. You do amazing work with restorative justice. And I don't know where to begin for the audience because there's just so many kind of Kit stories and pathways. So if it's okay with you, I just want to hand it over to you so that you can tell the people who you are.
It's such a cool invitation, like when someone says that to you, to not just like trot out some static story, but more like, well, now who am I? Now today, who am I? Sometimes, so I'll say one thing I am is I'm sitting here in the same city as Des, which is a blessing, Rochester, New York. And it's a city that I have family that goes back here now 4 generations. So this part of the planet means a lot to me. I actually think mid-sized cities are where it's at now. Sometimes people live in like the big cities and they're kind of like a little whatever. I'm like, no, you're missing the boat. Mid-sized cities are where it's at. I feel really dedicated to this part of the world for a long time. I've always assumed that as climate change got on more and more people's radar, and as we began to make more decisions based on that this was going to be a region that was going to be critical because of the enormous amount of fresh water we have relative to other places, and in many ways the sort of weather stability that we have, meaning we're not so subject to like earthquakes or or fires like when I lived in California, and that was such a part of people's lives. But also we can keep it moving here. If it's 5 degrees or 95 degrees, I mean, we just keep it moving. So I'm proud of that. And I love living here. And I like it also, even that the cost of living means I can get out of here too. I'm not, strapped because I'm paying all my money in rent.
Rochester is absolutely beautiful. And kind of coming here originally from the Pittsburgh, PA area, then going to college, more Western New York, and then kind of finding my way up here. I feel exactly the same way. Just mid-sized cities where it's at. So when you're holding down here in Rochester, this has been kind of uniquely a part of your journey, and part of your journey, as you kind of name stuff like climate and paying attention, you've been one who's been very observant in terms of not just how people are in general, but how people relate, whether it's person to community, person to climate, person to system, but especially person to person.
Mhm.
And I would love to kind of hear, and I think our audience would love to hear kind of what has inspired, because I know I did a little introduction, but what has inspired your work to to pay so much attention to how folk interact with each other, in how that affects culture and how that affects team? What has that been, kind of what's been your motivating factor for that?
Hmm. I think one thing is I've always imagined what the world could be. Sometimes the gap between what I know is possible and what we have breaks my heart. I gotta take good care of that, which is why I started getting involved in doing like grief work, both solo and in community. I think grief work belongs to community work because I know the gap between what we could all be living right now and what we have is just so enormous. So it's like I've always had this kind of potential of what I thought we could be, and like have tried like lived in the gap of that in so many ways in my life. And so coming to terms with the world being different than what I wanted it to be, and coming to terms with the idea that I would spend my life trying to make a world probably come into possibility that I probably wouldn't live to see. So the idea of elderhood and being an elder has been with me for a long time. I had an older mentor years ago. I mentioned something about that. She goes, "You're too young to be thinking about that." And I said, "I think people need to start thinking about what it means to be an elder from the time that they're teenagers. Like, because even when we're teens, we've got younger people who are looking to us, you know." So it's been important to me to think about, how do I want to show up for the people who are coming after me. I've been also really shaped by working and being, like so lucky to be in relationship and working with indigenous people in this region for years now. And certainly my perspective on that has been even more supported through a deep connection. Indigenous people, they're very focused on the people that are coming after. It's not all about us. And so I've been supported with that. I think now, as we're going through such times of churning and change, which needs to happen, right? We need a business as usual to break down for the next thing to be able to come through, and it needs to happen fast. And so it's so painful. But I think a big thing that one of my teachers, Joanna Macy, said when she was asked about her work that exceeded like 7 decades on the planet. They said, what's been kind of behind your body of work? And she said, when things fall apart, I want people to know how to turn toward each other rather than on each other. And that's kind of like I'll pick that up and carry the torch now that she's passed. That's a major impetus for me, that I want us to know how to be with each other in the difficulties. And that's just led to so many different fields I've studied. That's like I'm always learning about systems thinking. I went back to and got my graduate degree in part focused on trying to understand how systems work, how our brains work. Our brains are still Stone Age brains in a lot of ways. So the way that we think often like gets in the way of what we need now. So how do we become more insightful? But most of all, like, yeah, how do we learn to love each other, not turn on each other? And love for me has been like is the path, especially loving people who are different from us. Because when we love people who are different from us, as many people who are different from us as we can, then we become braver, clearer about what we're here to do.
Wow. So you talked a bit about coming into grief work, and how in that grief work it seems like it's kind of expanded into a deeper view on just systems in general. and kind of wanting to be leading in love, wanting to be that healing force, so that, to that quote you said, so that people turn to each other instead of on each other.
Yeah.
So what you talked a bit, there's so many places to go. So you talked a bit also about kind of taking on the mindset of what it means to be an elder even at a young age, and kind of how that's showed up. And when I think of that, I think of the elders in my life growing up, right? Whether it was mom or dad, or it was grandma or granddad, or the aunts or the uncles, kind of set that tone and that barometer of like how we engage with one another as siblings or as cousins or whatever, the life lessons and all of that.
Hmm.
And so you mentioned systems and how that shows up. My question for you is, how have you been able to take kind of deeply personal things like love and apply it in a systems type of perspective, where for a lot of our systems usually we're only focused about productivity, capital, out, churning out products or services. How have you been able to kind of navigate and put some of that humanity back in that work?
One thing that's important for me is, and I've had to do this work with myself so I could be in any way legit and thinking about it with other humans, is just to really realize that so much of the conditioning that was dumped into my little brain early on without my consent, that related to competition and urgency and treating myself like an object, treating other people like an object, the things that make us not human to one another, that's part of the system that was like handed to us. And I often say that's why we have to do the inside work, because there have been many stories where people worked hard to make change in their society, but when they didn't make the change inside, once they got into power themselves, they replicated the patterns, so that the systems, they live inside of us and outside of us. So we have to really like excavate, you know and we can never, for me, I always call myself a recovering racist. I can never fully excavate all that in me. It's just part of the work I have to do in order to show up in good ways. But I'm going to be recovering from all the things that all of us are going to be recovering from: patriarchy. I'm going to be recovering from kind of thinking about the world as objects, thinking about nature as like a storehouse of stuff for us rather than our mother, So like there's so much work that we can do, which is great because we're inside our own heads all the time. So why not do that? And then to have enough sort of mercy or self-awareness that we can begin to extend, to other people. And that includes people who we don't agree with, or people that make choices that, we are not down with at all. How do we get brave enough to like speak up in ways that help people see what we're seeing, rather than retreat further into defensiveness and judgment? And yeah, so that's why I really like, the work that I'm privileged to do with some friends and colleagues at University of Rochester around the Restorative Practices Initiative. I cut my teeth on that work in the community of Rochester. I was part of the movement in 2014, 15, 16 to incorporate restorative work into the Rochester City School District. Years previous to that, I'd seen it be used. We'd have leaders come through who would become enthusiastic about it. We would begin to apply it as a practice. But until these kinds of ideas move into policies, and they can always be just tossed out when the next leader comes through. So how do we move these culture shifts more and more from being like good ideas to actually being implemented, has been a big part of what I've been interested in. So, but I get a chance to practice every day, Des, like just even today, a couple of earlier conversations. I'm officially on strike from work this afternoon, because today's a strike day. We're practicing, we're flexing our muscles for all the general strikes we're going to need to have in this country. So I worked this morning because I had some people that were looking to talk to me. But you're not work. This is fun. But I mean, I'm almost always talking to people where I'm hearing, there's a huge gap between the stated values of what they stand for and what they're actually doing. And I'm just really engaged with trying to help them shrink the gap, especially around, the work we do. A lot of it relates to harm that's happening to people because of identity or because of their relative, lack of power in the system. Does that make sense? I'm saying everything whenever you ask me a question.
No, you're good. You're good. That makes perfect sense. I think one, first off, yes to the strike. We are definitely on strike right now. Two, the for me, that's always been kind of a challenge, if you will, on how to go about navigating that mercy piece within a relationally. I got it. Friends, no problem. I got it. When it comes to work and these expectations and things that we have, there are times where I can struggle with that. And if I'm being transparent, struggling with that because I'm usually on the receiving end of needing the mercy, right? Because maybe something that I did. And so if you were talking with a leader, director of HR or someone who's leading a team, and they want to implement that a little bit more because they think there's opportunities to just maybe better their overall kind of team environment, their whether you want to call it psychological safety or whatever. You mentioned it being oftentimes taking on an action, but not necessarily solidified in policy. What would you say that looks like just within an organization?
Well, the two practices that I think don't need to be put into policy that I recommend over and over again to managers and team leaders when we're hanging out. One is to do something, like as simple as a check-in. I know you guys do that on your team because we're socialized to take each other personally. So if somebody shows up and they're in the midst of a hard time or a hard day, which many of us are, to just be able to say something about what's true for me in the moment, it does so many things, right? It gives us a chance to just get a little bit of like exhale for some empathy for whatever, I was doing a minute before I jumped into this meeting. It lets everybody else know, if there's some tenderness or even like sometimes people show up with like really like numb face, no expression, that we're just not going to take it as personally with each other. And also it's fun sometimes to hear, like how weird and wonderful we all are too. You can do that. So I'm working right now with like creating a check-in guide to share with like leaders across the university because I think that can be really helpful. And when I say I mean that, the book I wrote, I interviewed like 18 colleagues about what was important about how we work together. So I'm saying this strengthened by all the feedback from these amazing people that I've worked with for years over at Gandhi Institute, both staff and board members. The other thing I think it's really critical is to recognize that most of us are socialized to like fear conflict a little bit. So we don't give each other feedback when we need it. So the other guide we're working on is to have people become very disciplined about feedback. And I'm not talking performance evaluations. I'm talking about just telling each other how the things that we do with each other matter, how they make a difference. So most like the meetings that I had this morning, at the end, a quick wrap up with my colleague, like how we do together today, like I really appreciate it when you do this. I wondered about how I did that, just to stop and exchange that to make sure that we're also making deposits in the sort of relational account that the two of us have to be able to say hard things. And I wish we'd made a different there. I wish you'd done something different there, and just to be able to say all the things. So for me, like a really important practices are those check-ins and feedback in different ways. And I hope, I'm always eager to learn more, especially around feedback practices that people have. So if anybody that's listening has thoughts about that, all ears. So those are two things I think that we don't have to put into policy that for me could be potential game changers. It's been great working in different parts of the University of Rochester big ecosystem of like getting feedback from people like, hey, we started doing check-ins like you told us to do it 18 months ago and it's really helping, or like someone recently said, there was so little trust on our team. Now I can go to anybody and say anything about anything. Like, it's amazing. So like how do we build spaces where people know they matter, where they know that if there's you've got something to say to them, you'll say it. You'll say it in a timely way. You'll say it with care. And you'll say it to them, not to everybody else on the team, because gossip is like such a thing. Yeah, we could do a whole thing sometime around the utility that gossip serves, the needs that it meets and the needs it doesn't meet. I
I,
mean, as far as go ahead.
no, I was going to say I've never heard anyone say that gossip could serve a need before. That caught my attention. Sorry.
Yeah, well, it obviously serves a need, or else we wouldn't do it, right? So what does gossip need? Meets our needs for connection sometimes. Oh my God, did you hear XYZ? It meets our need to feel alive, if we're feeling kind of like low or numb or disconnected, which a lot of us feel because of the state of the world or because of the choices that we have to make where we earn our daily bread. Like something that makes you feel kind of juiced up and alive. It's like, oh, did you hear? Oh my God, So I can see why people gossip. So I never want to just throw out something that is such a human thing to do. It can be the
Hmm.
currency of community. Gossip can also be, oh my God, so and so is, just got a cancer diagnosis. Sounds like gossip, but hey, why don't we all also like figure out like get a meal train together, to help take care, right? So gossip can also lead to people moving to action on behalf of each other. And also gossip can be a way for us to blow off steam, but not actually ever address what we need to address with the person that needs to be talked to. So yeah. As far as the practices and policies, I for me, I think one thing that's true is that there's a quote from Primo Levi, who was like this Italian chemist who was Jewish, who died after World War II. He survived concentration camps, and he talks about how addictive power is, like especially like
Hmm.
structural power or media power. And he says even sometimes when people are introduced to it accidentally, they become like junkies. And I think that it's true that a lot of us, and again, I think this is human, so I'm not denigrating it, but I think power is quite an addictive substance. And from the research that I've looked at it, and I mean structural power, not the power that anyone of us has. You have this power to pull together this community and do this website. I've had some power to do some things. I'm talking about when we get institutional or structural power, where we begin to be able to make, control over decisions over other people's lives. So I would like to see way more guardrails for people in powerful positions. I would like us to recognize that, like having rank and influence, especially over long periods of time, almost like really generally blinds us to the value of other people. Other people start telling us the truth about things, and that's a real problem. I think leaders often get isolated from they don't know the truth. Sometimes
Hmm.
they're not sure who's actually telling them anything, because people tend to treat them instrumentally when you have power. I tell a story in my book about speaking on some of these topics years ago in your hometown in Pittsburgh, and it was at this graduate program, maybe at Carnegie Mellon, and I was talking about the rank and power as a drug. And this guy who was like the dean of the program, he told a story of that for 1 year he was the director of the Pittsburgh Community Foundation, which is a really influential organization in the region, and he was the interim head. He was asked, he said that the night that they called him and he accepted the position, that the guy said, "Thank you again for doing this. It starts tomorrow, and by the way, this is the last honest conversation you're going to have with anybody until for the next year." And he said he hung up the phone and was like, "Oh, that's funny." He said, "But it was true." He said, "My relationship with every single person in my life except my wife changed when I got that position. Suddenly, like people that had known me for years that we'd hung out with started acting like I had pearls falling from my mouth every time I spoke. And I was the same person, you know? So it's not just the people having power, it's how we relate to the people with power. So I wish we could have like more conversations about how do we set up better guardrails so that the people that need to have those kind of roles, it's term limited. There's lots of opportunities for care and feedback. So yeah, I'm very interested in that.
Wow. So then When we're looking at situations of power and when we're dealing with somebody who is kind of in a place of power, right? And in a place to be influential, and you're kind of on the receiving end. Maybe you're a supervisee, you're a part of the team. And so you're on the receiving end of those decisions that get made. My question for you is, how would you advise someone if they're, well, for instance, in my work, in my burnout work, I look at Maslow's 6 core areas of like mismatches: workload mismatch, values, fairness, whatever. If they're seeing some type of, let's say, maybe not a values mismatch, because I think sometimes that just comes down to if you want to stay on the team or not, if there's a disconnect in terms of values. But maybe there's just something structurally or systematically that they just don't agree with. How would someone go about bringing that up? Or do they bring that up?
So you're talking about someone who's going to be speaking to someone with more rank or seniority to have that
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if we want to role play it for a minute, and I'm the
Okay.
person who wants to bring it up, and you're the person sitting in that other spot, I
Sure.
could say, "Excuse me, Mr. Davis. No, excuse me, Des. There's something I've been thinking about for a while, and I would like to include it the next time that we get together and do a check-in about my work. And is that okay for you to include in our agenda next time we get together?"
Yeah. Do you just want to tell me now?
Yeah. Well, part of me wants to tell you, and part of me is worried about not having enough time to unpack it. But I'll just give you the headline for today.
Yeah.
So I've been in the work now for X number of months, and I have like some real questions around a sense of fit. I worry sometimes that like sort of the stated values of what we're supposed to be doing, there's a gap there for me between our stated values and what we're actually able to do. And of I know there's a lot of reasons for that. And for me, I always want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So I thought it made sense to kind of bring it to you and think with you about that. So that's kind of the headline of what I wanted to talk about.
Hmm.
And how was that to hear?
Yeah. If I heard that, I think I'm instantly curious. I think the wanting to be a part of the solution instead of the problem kind of gives me the sense of like, oh, so they just haven't been just, they're not just here to just complain. They haven't been here just gossiping. They're here like they actually want to find a solution. Where like hearing something like that, I would almost be inclined to say, hey, well, let's go get lunch. Let's if you want to go talk, like, because that was like, wow, okay, all right. So then when, okay, so here's kind of a wrinkle. Growing up in church, growing up in the black church, we talk a lot about how to bring forth grievances,
Mm-hmm.
right? And what that looks like. And if you can't go to your brother privately, then you go to your brother in public, so on and so forth. Now, at what point do we go from kind of keeping it to ourselves, navigating it, figuring it out, and then actually talking to like getting consensus around you? Because sometimes I feel that people worry that they're stirring the pot, that not the pot, right? And that they're starting stuff, sharing those concerns. Are you able to speak to that and kind of what the difference is in that? I know you talked a little bit about it with gossiping, but I kind of wanted to really hone in on that.
Yeah, and again, are you speaking more around having concerns about a specific leader, or more like broader, like institutional concerns?
I would say probably be more institutional concerns is what I've seen sometimes with past clients. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey, family. I hope you've been loving the conversation so far. Now, you already know at the Inspired House, we got your back. We're here to help you beat burnout. We're here to help you be your best self. Ultimately, we're just trying to help you feel good. But you know what goes a long way in somebody feeling good? It's looking good. And that's why we're really excited for the sponsor of today's episode, Purpose Grooming Lounge, right here in Rochester, New York. The Purpose Grooming Lounge is one of the best barbershops in the Rochester area. And if you're from Rochester, you know this place is no secret. And if you heard of the shop, then you already know about the owner, Jamil Gaines. Mill is one of the best barbers in the city and who I personally trust to keep me clean and tight for every podcast, for every workshop, and for every video we put out on the Inspired House. But if you don't believe me, take his word for it.
Hey, this is Mills, Them People's Barber. If you're looking for a good haircut, good quality professional service, come on down to Purpose Grooming Lounge.
Hey, shout out to Mills and all the barbers at the Purpose Grooming Lounge. Check them out at 6 Atlas Street, Rochester, New York. And if you go in and decide to get a 90s high top fade like me, just tell them the Inspired House sent you. Back to the show.
I like what you were brought up in, where I'm going to first bring it to, the supervisor, manager, leader, and just to name it. And it's definitely true for me that how there's been several times when our team's been called in to help, where a manager or leader knows a lot is going on. They know a lot about what's going on, and they feel helpless to know what to do. The people that they may have reached out to for help haven't been helpful, or there's these kind of default like reporting, just file this report, where sometimes you don't trust that that's actually going to be anything that's going to support. It could actually just make matters worse. So for me, I would want to start with that person, and even if there's a disconnect or some hostility, just out of my own need for integrity, I'm going to start there and do what I can to build a relationship with them. And if they're not open to that, then I've checked that box off for my own self. And I mean, one of my meetings this morning was a person in a large department who has been advocating for change as an informal leader for years and hasn't seen some of the changes that they've wanted to see. And so they, I think I like what she talked about, which is that she finds her allies in the department who are seeing have a similar set of concerns, to talk about, what can we do? What are the changes we can make? How do we align the change that we're seeking to make with the stated values, of the organization? How do we also look for, from social innovation theory, they talk about, like, in low performing systems, that if you can find places that just despite all odds are doing it well, doing it right, like, how do you go and learn from those areas and like amplify what they're able to do, despite the fact that most other people in the system aren't able to do that thing. So I always love respectfully interviewing people that seem to know how to do it, and see if we could bring some of that intelligence or wisdom back to this other situation. One thing, a project that I did years ago in the Rochester City School District, because there's been complaints and concerns about those schools for a long, unfortunately for too long, and we did a positive assets inventory project called a Bright Spots Inventory, where we would go in with a little team of people and we would just walk around and we would look for like low inference observations where we saw people in a building caring for one another. Like, it could be a verbal exchange, it could be like stated information on the walls, it could be like what did we see evidence of where we saw people really caring for each other in these buildings. We'd collect in about 2 hours, usually like a couple hundred examples of it, just in a couple of hours. Get back into a room, dump it all into a spreadsheet, have a sandwich, and then sit down with the school principal. We would, of course, be there by the invitation of the principal, and be able to share this great report of all the things we saw just this morning in your building that were happening, as a way to kind of combat this sort of negative thinking of, we can't do anything right, it's this place, that. So I think that there's different strategies that you can use when you're trying to make change in different sized institutions. But for me, it always starts with like trying to, respect the roles that people have, not trying to do end runs around it, and all the way just checking yourself for your own integrity. And then sometimes getting to the end of the road and being like, I did what I could here. I don't see I'm able to do more. And so the only thing I've got left to do now is vote with my feet, and I'm out of here.
Wow. I've never heard somebody put it that way, voting with their feet and using a bright spot inventory. When you do something like that, what is the hope of, like, if someone's listening and they're trying to impact where they are, whether it's work or, I don't know, maybe a family, whatever.
Yeah.
What would be the benefits of doing something like a bright spots inventory? What does that do?
Well, that whole quote of with our thoughts we make the world. Like, if we're convinced that this place sucks, or we're not fill in the blank, we're not our family, we don't care about one another or whatever, to try to just like stop and check is how true is that? Or when actually do we show up for each other in good ways? And what is that
Mm,
meaning for us? And how can we do more of that? And how can we be more intentional about making sure that everybody here knows that they matter? I think that's one of the
mm,
things for me that's most painful about kind of how capitalism lives between our ears. We don't really trust that we matter. And so then the corollary to that is that we don't act like we matter. We don't speak like we matter. So we just burn things down sometimes around us. So how do we like create environments where people know that they matter and where we treat people consistently more and more like they matter? And I think that's just as important in a family as it is in a school or a community group, an organization. So that means paying attention, being respectful, and I think especially as talking about eldership, one of the forms of discrimination I learned a long time ago is adultism. Where adults think they can make decisions for kids without including kids. So how do we start practicing that and modeling respect for the kids from the jump so that they give it back to us when it's their turn to sort of turn from the family a little bit, keep those
mm.
relationships going.
Wow. Okay, providing a greater sense, confirming that somebody matters and reaffirming that, especially even in their agency. And okay, I can see that. All right, so then this is kind of made me think of this question that I have written down. So in your book, you talk about how you basically exploring everything from organizational structures essentially to like pay decisions and physical workplaces. There are opportunities to honor humanness,
Mhm.
right? And so I guess what, in addition, kind of you already gave one, but what is one structural or kind of policy level change that can immediately shift a culture? Let's say, even if we're not going from a place of just like going straight to nonviolence, because maybe they're saying like we're not violent, but just
Yeah.
if not shifting away from something, shifting them to an ideal place. What would you say policy level change that might be more doable?
One of the things that I hear from people frequently is how their voices get consulted, but it's just window dressing. I frequently hear from people like, "Oh yeah, we were called in to interview a candidate for a position, and then we found out afterwards that they had already been hired, and we were just being brought in just to make it look participatory." I hear
Wow.
that quite frequently. So I would say if you're going to be clear about what's participatory and what's not participatory, and then walk your talk. Like if there's some things where, like if you're a manager and a leader, you just can't really imagine making it participatory. First, ask other people how you could make it more participatory. Like, and one of the examples that I give in the book is like, I didn't really think about it when I first started working at the Gandhi Institute, but I had these meetings with the board of trustees, like I think it was every other month, and I would write reports, on behalf of the staff to the board. And then at some point, I was like, why am I writing the reports? So then we started writing the reports, all of us together. Everyone on the staff would put something in about something that was significant for them that had taken place in the last 8 weeks. And then also maybe a challenge or something that they'd had. So we were, kind of showing both sides of the aisle. Then we started inviting staff to come and sit in on board meetings too. And then even at our annual meetings, we invited board and staff and family members to all come together, and we made it kid friendly and had fun, and just like it was like something, it was progressive over time. But for me, like how do we make more and more of what we do participatory, engaging, and sometimes like even doing small things, especially doing them consistently, can really begin to gain people's sense of trust and interest. Well, now it's going to happen, you know. I have to say that for me, we never paid people very well. We were always very low budget, and also I had a really big value around the pay scale. So when I was at the institute, our pay scale was like 1 to 2.5, meaning the lowest paid person was making I was making 2.5 more. Can I talk about math this morning? I don't know. 2.5 times more than the lowest paid person. So basically we had quite a low pay scale compared to most places. But so we weren't really able to, and we retained people for years, and it wasn't because of the pay. On the contrary, it was because of the culture, and also because we were able to do things like we had a really generous vacation policy. We had like the EU vacation policy, which I used to write articles about in the Rochester Business Journal, because I'm like, you can, if you set yourself up for it, you can be very generous. Like the 2-week vacation, 3-week vacation policy that we have in the United States. If you travel to other countries, people are like, you people are insane. And I'm like, I know we are. We don't rest enough. We're just going all the time. We treat ourselves like objects. We treat other people like objects. We need more time to be human. So I think being more participatory and looking for creative ways and asking other people to help you think about it. It's not just if you're a leader, a manager, it's not just on you. Ask people for help.
Yeah.
And listen.
So many insights, and I'm just like trying to. It's like a tree, and there's like all this good fruit, and you're like, which one do I pick first? So
I like that metaphor instead of like trying to drink from a fire hose. Like, jeez.
oh yeah, no, because all of it went down. It's just like, man, so much good fruit. What you talked about, kind of in your structure, so you mentioned a lot, and so I'm trying to pick up where I would want to really follow up with. A lot of this sounds like it's informed, of course, from your own experience, but also kind of the training that you have in a lot of the work that you do. And I know we did an introduction and everything else, and we talked a little bit about restorative practice and restorative justice and what that looks like. And I'm sitting here thinking about questions from my audience perspective. For those who may not know what restorative practice or restorative justice 101 is, could you give us kind of that synopsis of what that looks like?
Yeah, restorative practices are basically the justice system of most early human communities. The idea is that everyone is valuable. No one can be thrown away without a cost to other people, and that we're all related and we're all connected to each other. So, like, think about it for like how many hundreds of generations did we have our ancestors who lived in like little groups. So if
Mm-hmm.
someone did something, I've loved studying this, like some of the like there was this really cool like ancient judicial system in ancient Ireland that was very restorative in its framework. And the Haudenosaunee people on whose land we live. So there's a lot of scholarship out about that. Still, the Maori people in New Zealand. So restorative justice basically is recognizing, like that decisions that are need to be made by the people who are affected. So if someone does something that's harmful to another person or a group of people, the idea behind restorative practices is that on the harm end of things is that the people who are involved get together. They get support to think through what happened, the consequences of it, the learning from it, and then they come together and they decide together like what needs to happen now to make things right. And gosh, there's so many stories about it. Like one that I heard that's local here was that some, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago now, in one of the suburbs here in Rochester that has a very high Jewish population, a group of kids got together and one night they burned a swastika in the middle of an intersection in one of the neighborhoods, which
Sheesh.
you can imagine, in a heavily Jewish neighborhood would be very,
Yeah.
very frightening and consequential. And
Yeah.
so the judge who was, and it was adjudicated, it was seen as a hate crime. So that's federal. So when the young people that were involved were identified, the judge was willing to let it be adjudicated as a restorative process alongside the legal process. And so the young people were each interviewed, like what were you thinking? What are you understanding now have been the impacts? A lot of times the young people are like, now I'm seeing my mom, my dad, they're losing time. There's shame in our family for the choices I made. And then we asked, like, what do you want to see happen? So I think when that took place, so the people that were interviewed were the youth, their families, the neighborhood, and some like community leaders. They did a big circle, like 30 people. And at the time, in the community, a lot of people were feeling skeptical about this.
If I can, just real quick, just for our audience, can you describe a circle?
Yeah, it's literally a circle, and it's where people are getting together. It's facilitated. There's a question that gets called, and then just people go around. So, for instance, like a circle might be, like after introductions and stuff, you might, what do you want to say about what happened that brings you here today? And someone say, I live across the street from where the thing got burned. I was one of the youth who made the thing happen. I'm the mother of a youth. I'm the father, a grandmother, grandfather. So I'm on city council. I'm one of the people that was here that recommended we try to go with this approach rather than just through the court system. So that's and then we go through the questions. So what brings you into the space? How have you been impacted? How have other people been impacted? What do you think we could do to make this right? And so I love having things in the community because and living here for a long time, because then you get to hear the consequences for years after. So I was in a meeting like a couple years after all this happened, and actually all the recommendations that the circle made, the judge actually just made those be part of the kind of agreement. So the judge was able to use what happened in the circle. It was in lieu of the court case, and the people that were involved were satisfied. So the families felt it was fair, the neighborhood felt it was fair, the community leaders felt it was fair. And so I was talking to this lady who was serving as a volunteer receptionist at the Jewish Community Center, and I don't know how we got on the topic, but she said the nicest young guy was just here. He was volunteering, helping out, and I realized afterwards he was one of the kids who burned the swastika. He's been here volunteering, and he told me that that's why he's here, and he apologized to me. So we were at Gandhi Institute, we were often part of opportunities for kids who had screwed up, and not just kids, but older people to come and do community service and learn and grow. I got a pile of stories about, hate crimes and other things that people have done where it's wanting people to be better because of what happened, not just throwing the book at them and making them feel like garbage. Yeah. I'll say another one. In my friend in Brazil, Dominic Barter, who's inspired me with this work, he was doing this work in Sao Paulo School District, which is the largest school district in the world. And he had worked in a school with his team, and then they left. And then the next day, a kid was found who had been stealing food. And usually the kid would have just been expelled, stealing other kids' lunches. But they were like, hey, we just did this training. Let's use this training. So they sat down and started having the conversation. And they found out that this kid he came from a really large family, and the parents could only afford to feed the kids every couple days. So on the off days, the kids in the family had to find food in other places. So he, unlike his siblings who were just out in the community scavenging, he really wanted to go to school. So he scavenged food from inside of the school, and it was called stealing. So it was an amazing thing because, one, these teachers found out that this kid was actually super dedicated as a student. He was not a bad kid. Two, they found out that this family was in way worse shape than they had ever understood that the family was. And they all learned so much from it. So that's the thing that I love about restorative, is that there's so much learning on an individual and institutional level. When our daughter died years ago, we did those kind of conversations with the caregivers who were involved, and it led to some changes that were really meaningful to us. So I can just go on and on with this stuff. You're muted, so I'm missing out on your words.
Sorry. No, to your point, that's awesome though, because those stories kind of show that there's a level of curiosity, there's a level of almost I don't want to say suspending judgment, but that opportunity and that grace, going back to that mercy point of learning. And we actually have a question from the audience. They said, it says Jared, I believe, if I've been hurt, why would I want restorative at the expense of justice? Don't mean harm by it, of course. So they don't mean harm or mean to be disrespectful in what they're asking. They're just asking, I guess they're saying, does restorative come at the expense of justice?
I think restorative is real justice. I don't think making people like, because like if someone's done harm to us, we want them to learn to be different.
Mhm.
We think that punishing them will do the trick. The data on that is that for the most part, like if a youth does something, or, and I'm not talking about like violent crime and stuff. I'm talking about things where there's a reasonable opportunity for people to continue their lives. Like a lot of civil suits can be resolved using restorative practices. But so for me, like when our daughter died as a result of, she was given the wrong medication for her, there were a lot of healthcare providers who were involved, and we wanted the system to get smarter. We didn't just want individuals to get punished.
Yeah.
So for me, that felt more like justice than punish. I want learning, and I want more intelligence out in the world than this sort of, and again, we've been educated to think punishment is the thing we should want. And I understand that. But part of the reason why I like to talk about restorative work is I actually think that this is much more satisfying for us as human beings than just throwing the book at someone. There's so many amazing stories of people who have done this kind of work after even murder and really difficult things. I hope that they get curious to learn more about it.
Yo, family, what you got going on right now? What you doing? Nothing? I didn't think so. Look, you should stop over the house. Yes, I am cordially inviting you, but wait, not my house, not here. God, no. I'm talking about our online community, the Inspired House, family. Check it out. The Inspired House is a place where you can get coaching, be a part of co-working spaces virtually so you don't got to be grinding alone, sit in on our podcast and ask questions of the amazing guests that we're interviewing, and find community where there are other folk who are focused on bettering themselves, bettering their relationships, bettering their careers, and of course, bettering their money. So if you are someone who's looking to be tied in with community and you want to rock with us a little bit more, click the link in the description or check out the show notes and come be a part of the Inspired House community. Welcome home. That is so well said. Thank you for that. And thank you for holding that space of just making the argument that, and again, like within reason, because to Jared, we don't know exactly what harm you're talking about, right? So there's, different consequences, different responses for different actions. But
Yeah.
if we're kind of tying it back to some of those other examples and stories that you've given, that opportunity is we want that action to stop and we want to see people be better. And I think that has to come from a place of mercy. That has to come from a place of kind of practicing that curiosity. It makes me think of, I'm going to say this and I'm going to ask you the final question. It's something something new that we're doing. We're going to be asking people what books they're reading as of late to kind of close us out. But I've been reading Calling In by Loretta Ross, I believe. And the amount of work she puts in when she addresses this idea that when we're calling in and when we're seeing wrong that's done and kind of having that restorative mindset, she made this claim that the first thing that we think, right, our first thought or our first initial desired action is our bias, is our own kind of just us, I guess. And then when we take a second to pause, usually she says that second thought, that follow up is usually what our values truly are. And to kind of your point, what I'm hearing is you're giving story after story where even when like something messed up is happening, that knee jerk reaction might be like, oh, throw the book at them. But if we pause for a second and breathe, that follow up thought really is what reveals our values and says a lot, I think, about us and our character and how we operate. And the grace that we give can equal out to the grace that we receive. And so I absolutely love that. And just, I believe we're going to say it's Jared. Jared, I hope that helps, friend. By all means, please follow up with questions if you have them. But for my last question, because I know we're over time, for you, what books are you currently reading?
I just finished reading, you're a church kid, I just finished reading a book called Undivided, and the author's name is Hari Han, H-A-N, and It's about a mega church in Ohio that did this
Mm.
amazing project of anti-racism that led to policy changes. Like they all got together active, and this was during the Trump administration, the first one. And so I'm super inspired by that book right now. Yeah, Undivided, and the author's last name is Han, H-A-N. It was such a good read, and it's really for me about the power of relationships, because they built relationships in this large mega church between which had a lot of black and brown members as well as white members, and they created this amazing program that led to a lot of political activism and big changes in people's lives. So that's one. I'm reading my new book is called The Womanist Reader, and it's about kind of Alice Walker's thinking about how feminism was never really great for black women. So womanism is kind of like the intersectional thinking about race and gender. So I'm about to dive into that thing.
Okay. I like that. And that last one was by who?
The Womanist Reader is by Laylee Phillips.
Laylee Phillips. Okay. Okay. Undivided and Womanist Thinker. Awesome. Okay. Thank you. So I just want to say thank you so much for giving us your time, rocking with us for an hour, answering some questions in the chat. If people want to reach out to you or connect with you, what would be the best way to do that, would you say?
I've got an email at Gandhi Institute. It's just KIT at GandhiInstitute.org. I have a website. It's nonviolenceatwork.org. People often reach out to me through that. I also have a blog that I write there. I just wrote a blog about my mom's death that I'm getting some feedback on. So there's a couple ways. Or they could ask you. You and I can talk.
There you go. That's a fact. Yeah. So then what we'll do for the people who are in the community that are watching this live, I'll make sure I drop all the links, emails, all those things to be able to get in touch with Kit. If you're watching this on any of our platforms, you will see all the links in the description, as well as your ability to pick up your own copy of Culture Shift, Nonviolence at Work, which is an excellent book. I highly recommend, if you are anyone who is a leader, if you're anyone who just wants to be able to make your sphere of influence better, I highly recommend you pick up that book. And I don't know too many authors that make themselves this available to engage and to talk with and stuff. And so if you have questions, definitely reach out. But Kit, I just want to say thank you so much for rocking with us and giving us your time. Shout out to you who have been watching and listening. We'll see you again in about a week. But I've been Desmond. Y'all have been awesome. Thank you for hanging out at the Inspire House. Now go change the world. We'll see y'all later. Peace.